Great. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Illumine our hearts, O Master, who lovest mankind with the pure light of thy divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to the understanding of thy gospel teachings. Implant in us also the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things as are well pleasing unto thee, for thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies. O Christ our God, and unto thee we ascribe glory, together with thy Father, who is from everlasting, and thine all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being here today. And we had a great retreat yesterday. Wow. I was dynamite. She is one of my favorite authors, speakers. So I'm glad she was here. So we're going to continue with our discussion of the Christian Old Testament, Jesus the Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. And again, we've been talking now about prophecies regarding the suffering, death, and resurrection of the Messiah. And just to review, last week we talked about the betrayal of Judas, and the Old Testament prophecy regarding that was from the prophet Zechariah, which, by the way, we're commemorating today in our church calendar. So today is his feast day, if you will, or commemoration day. And just to review the prophecy, Yahweh says to the prophet Zechariah, become shepherd of the flock. And Zechariah, I then said to the elders of Israel, if you see fit, give me my wages. If not, never mind. So they weighed out my wages, 30 shekels of silver. Yahweh then said to me, throw it to the potter, because it was such a minimal sum. It was insulting. It was the wages of a slave, essentially. Throw it to the potter, this princely sum at which I was valued by them. Taking the 30 shekels of silver, I, Zechariah, threw them into the temple of Yahweh for the potter. And it was the first part of the prophecy was fulfilled by Judas, and the Gospel of Matthew tells us Judas then called Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the high priest and said to them, what will you give me? Give to me, and I will hand him, Jesus, over to you. And we know he does that. Jesus is arrested. And then the prophecy is fulfilled. Jesus is arrested. And it doesn't go the way Judas expected. He expected Jesus to be arrested, maybe get a trial, but not to be condemned to death. Because Jesus had escaped death several times beforehand, if you remember. First time was in Nazareth. He went actually to preach in the synagogue there, and he preached the synagogue, and they were offended, and they took them, if you remember the gospel, to the edge of a cliff, and were going to throw him off and kill him. They were so offended by him, and he escaped death. And a couple of times later, when he was in Judea, the Pharisees and the scribes wanted to kill him, and he escaped. But Judas, I think, expected that this was going to happen. He was going to get arrested and then escape, and he didn't. He was condemned to death. So when Judas the betrayer saw that Jesus was condemned, he felt remorse and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, I've sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. Throwing down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple, Judas departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the piece of silver, said, it's not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money, and conferring together, they use them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. And so the prophecy was exactly fulfilled as Zechariah has spoken. And then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. We talked last week. I don't know why Matthew uses the word Jeremiah, but at any rate, it's the Zechariah's prophecy. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord commanded me.
You think that Judas was in the crowd when Pilate said, "I want my hands"?
I think he had already gone and hanged himself by that time.
How would he know though that Jesus was condemned?
Well, he was condemned by the Sanhedrin, which was before he went to Pilate. They arrest him and they take him to Caiaphas, the high priest, and then the other elders, which is called the Sanhedrin, the ruling council, then come together, and then they condemn him to death. And then, well, no, I take it back. Then he goes to Pilate. They take him to Pilate because they tell Pilate, we don't have the authority to condemn him to death. But since you're the ruling civil authority, we want you to condemn him.
Right. Don't forget too, Judas realized that Jesus had escaped death these other times.
Yeah.
So maybe he actually thought that when they took Jesus, he just said that. Yeah. No. They took him at the beginning, at the very, at Gethsemane. Maybe that shocked him because he thought, I expected Jesus not to be taken.
Possibly.
And that could have really triggered him to feel really regretful.
Yes, and we'll see later today actually how that arrest happened and why that probably had an influence on Judas. As we'll see, the arrest wasn't exactly like we sometimes think it was. So for the people who surround Jesus in the Passion narratives, his work on behalf of Yahweh is worthless. But the work Judas does, which in betraying him, is worth something. That's why they paid Judas the money to betray. In the final analysis, however, this indicates that the people have placed a price on God's work in the world, even if it is primarily seen through the lens of hatred for Christ. And so they hate him, but they deem him worthy of the wages of a slave. And that hatred is expressed now in the Passion narratives. And so we'll talk about those in the next few weeks. And the Passion includes the betrayal, the abandonment by his disciples, the scourging, as you see up here on the left part of this panel, and then the humiliation by the soldiers, the road to Golgotha, and then finally this fourth panel with the crucifixion. And iconographically, Jesus is stepping up onto the cross. Mm-hmm. And what this indicates is that he's voluntarily being crucified. They don't have the authority to kill him because he is sinless. He's the sinless one, but he voluntarily gives himself up for the life of the world.
He didn't really he didn't really step up on the cross.
No, in reality, they nailed him to the cross. But the icon here shows him stepping up onto it as a visual indication that he does this on his own, by his own will. So the second stage in suffering and death of Christ is the Passion itself. The first stage is the betrayal. By Passion, we mean the trial of Christ, the crucifixion, and the entombment. The betrayal is the abandonment of Christ, as we have seen, but the theme of the Passion is the enmity toward Christ, and the enemies of Christ are brought to the forefront in the narratives of the Passion. And here is where we really see those who hate him and those who want to kill him. They're brought into the forefront in the gospel accounts. Those who demand his trial and execution are highlighted in their character and behavior. Now, there's a secondary theme that also runs through the Passion narratives, and that is revealed in the providing of the tomb by Joseph of Arimathea, one of Jesus's secretive disciples. So while all of this going on, the evil part is going on. There's also a light here that shines on the followers of Jesus. And it begins with Joseph of Arimathea. And we see this in the icon here. That's Joseph at the top. Now, he's a member of the Sanhedrin himself. He's one of the elders of Israel. But he's a secret disciple, just like Nicodemus. And Nicodemus is shown here at the bottom of the cross here as well. They're taking down Jesus from the cross. We do this on Great and Holy Friday, and we have a special service for that. And so who else is here? This is John, the disciple. This is the Theotokos. And these on the periphery are the women disciples of the Lord.
They were present when Jesus was taken down.
Correct. They were present at the crucifixion. And they're the only ones, except for John. All the other disciples have fled for their lives. They're afraid. So this theme demonstrates the respect Jesus' followers had for Christ, their acknowledgement of his humanity and his divinity, and the singular hope that will be revealed in the cross. Now, do they believe he's divine? I think so. I think this is what is intimating here. In fact, he has told them, I will rise on the third day. He's told them this several times beforehand. And so they believe that. So there's a crescendo, a leading up in the passages that moves from the betrayal and abandonment of Christ to the antagonism and the passion. The evil is finally overcome by the power of the cross, of course. And even in the midst of the darkness, there is a light that shines in Joseph and his willingness to come forward under conditions of great hostility and offer his own new tomb for the burial of Christ. Now, this icon is similar to the one we saw before, only this time now Jesus is laid out on the ground and he's going to be wrapped in the burial clothes for the entombment. The tomb here is behind. And in the gospel accounts, it says that the tomb is near where the crucifixion was. And that's one of the reasons why they were able to do it, because they had to hurry, get him down from the cross and buried before the Sabbath arose.
Who was that in the upper left?
And this here in the red, this is Mary Magdalene.
Oh,
And she's highlighted in this icon, and raising up her hands, she's wailing. This is the lamentation, she's wailing. And often she is seen in red. That seems to be the garment that she's iconographically shown in. And of course, there's the Theotokos. This is Joseph of Arimathea. And this is again John, the apostle, who is also present. So he has the courage to stand by Christ right up through the crucifixion and entombment. So now the second part of the suffering Christ is he's forsaken by his disciples. And again, the prophecy is from Zechariah. As the betrayal was also prophesied, also he prophesies the abandonment of Jesus by his disciples. And the prophecy is this: sword, awake against my shepherd, against my fellow man, declares Yahweh Sabaoth. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. Then I shall turn my hand against the young. So the prophecy is there by Zechariah. And this is an icon basically of what Zechariah just spoke of. And this is Jesus being arrested. That's Judas here in the center next to him. Jesus giving him the kiss of betrayal. These are the soldiers that have come to arrest Jesus. This is Peter, who is cutting off the ear of the servant of the high priest. And these are the rest of the disciples fleeing and abandoning Jesus. And so that's the prophecy in iconographic form. Now, in the original Hebrew, the phrase Jever Amiti, the man of my community or my fellow man. And it illustrates the dual nature of the messianic agent in the prophecy. On the one hand, his humanity is emphasized. The Hebrew word jeber refers to both a human and male specifically. And on the other hand, the divine aspect is also underscored because this agent that Zechariah is talking about is part of God's community. He is God's fellow man. So he is divine in that respect, because to be God the Father's fellow man is to be one of the Trinity, but by the same token, he's also a human being. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. The general opinion is that the shepherd of Zechariah in this verse is the leader of the people and the representative of Yahweh on earth, that is the Messiah. So strike the Messiah and the sheep will be scattered. What is interesting in the passage is that Yahweh himself ordered the annihilation of this leader. And this is very unique in the Old Testament. So it is Yahweh himself who is speaking in Zechariah 13:7, and he's the one who decides to destroy his representative and the leader of the people. Now, we said earlier, Jesus voluntarily went to the cross, and his Father himself is the one who sets this in motion. The same idea is found also in the prophecy of Isaiah 53:10. Yahweh has been pleased to crush him, and the servant is referred to in Isaiah, with suffering. So not just Zechariah, but other prophets have also prophesied in this respect. So the leader of the people is evidently very close to Yahweh on earth, as is every king in Israel who is considered an adopted son of God, as according to Psalm 2:7, but is still far away from him. So this binary and complementary relationship, near to God and yet far from him, is expressed by the phrase, my fellow man. That is, the subject is simultaneously human, a man, and part of my community, God's fellow person. Even so, however, in his efforts in the world, God must take what seems to be to us to be harsh action. The leader of the people, Yahweh's agent, is destroyed, and the entire nation is punished by God's retaliation for disobedience, vanity, and iniquity. Now, that refers to the Old Testament Israelites who, when they disobeyed God and started worshiping pagan deities and in vanity caused iniquity to themselves, then God retaliated against them, as we have heard before. The punishment of the nation is illustrated by the phrase, then I shall turn my hand even against the young ones. We'll talk about this a little bit later here this morning, what that means. So the text in Zechariah 13:7 was considered from the very early age in both Christian and Judaic traditions to be a messianic text. So both the Jews before Christ and later the early Christian church, when they looked at Zechariah 13:7, they both considered it to be referring to the Messiah to come. For Christians, this is an important text because it represents the Messiah as a man, but at the same time, very close to God. As we said, it is in the same vein of thought as Psalm 110, verse 1, in which there is a mysterious, enigmatic person playing the role of counselor or confidant, positioned between the king in the psalm, which is David, and God. And in Psalm 110, which the whole psalm, by the way, is a messianic psalm, the intermediary is portrayed as a man is not portrayed as a man, that is, as a human, but as someone certainly close to God. And it is significant that this person is introduced as operative between God and his representative on earth, namely David, in this psalm. I'm going to read the whole psalm to you here in a shortly because, like I said, it is messianic. And I want you to, when you hear it, instead of thinking of David as the subject, think of the Messiah as the subject of this psalm. So the first verse is this: the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Now, I think you've probably heard this verse in the New Testament as well, because Jesus actually refers to this verse when he's talking to the Pharisees. And he says, what do you say of the Christ? Whose son is he? The Pharisees say, well, he's David's son. And then he says, well, then how does David say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool? So in essence, the Lord, the Father, said to my Lord, the Messiah, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So again, think of the subject in this psalm as Jesus, as the Messiah. The Lord sends out from Zion your mighty scepter. That is, the Messiah will rule with a mighty rule. Rule in the midst of your foes. With you is dominion in the day of your power, in the splendor of your saints. From the womb before the morning star, I have begotten you. This is definitely messianic. We hear this several times in the Psalms and in the New Testament. The Lord has sworn and he will not change his mind. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. This we know is a reference to Jesus Christ. He is the high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, not according to the order of Aaron, which is the priesthood according to the law of Moses, but this is according to the law of the Father, God the Father. Okay. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings on the day of his wrath. He will execute judgment among the nations, filling them with corpses. He will shatter heads over the wide earth. In other words, all his enemies will be destroyed. And he does that when his resurrection from the dead. Those the ultimate enemy is destroyed. And then finally, he, Messiah, will drink from the brook by the path. Therefore, he will lift up his head. He will drink from the brook by the path. He will go through the passion. Okay, that's the Old Testament's psalmic way of saying he's going to go through all this. He's going to drink from the brook by the path. He's going to take in all that he has to take in. Therefore, he will lift up his head. He will rise from the dead. Okay. Questions about that? Saint Nikolai Velimirovich, who is a saint from the Serbian fathers of the church, takes this last verse, he will drink from the brook by the path, therefore he will lift up his head, and he writes a poetic meditation on that. And I want to read that to you because I think it expresses a lot of what we know about Jesus the Messiah. And Saint Nikolai poses this question to his audience. I shall ask you, somber brothers and sisters, and you respond to what I ask. If you were to have God come to earth, in what form would you wish to see him? And they answer, we should see him as a man, fairer than all the sons of men, mightier than all the sons of men in word, and mightier than all the sons of men in deed. We should wish to see him as an exceedingly handsome prince, not haughty, but meek as a lamb, someone who would come under our roofs, eat and drink with us, and share everything in common with us, except our weakness and sin. Then I tell you, you yourselves have already proven that God was among us. We should wish to see him as a man, although he can reveal himself in any fleshly form. When he speaks, he should speak mightily, as no man has ever spoken. And when he walks through this world, he should walk not as a hireling and as a slave, but as a Lord. Water and winds should listen to him. People should follow him. Evil spirits should flee from him. He should be of assistance to people every day, comforting those who mourn, healing the sick, resurrecting the dead. We should wish him to be this sort of God among us. Then I tell you, you yourselves have proven that God was among us. We should wish for him to come to us not as a king with a wealth that perishes, with an army that vanishes, or with a luster that tarnishes, not as a king, but as one greater than king. And we should wish him to come to us not as an ordinary prophet, but rather as one who was prophesied from the beginning of time, as one who would prophesy to us what will happen at the end of time and after the end of time. And we should wish for him to come to us not as a priest, but as a high priest in whom all three together appear: God, priest, and sacrifice. This is how we should wish for God to manifest himself among us. So then I tell you, you yourselves have proven that God was among us. Isn't that a great meditation?
Who wrote that?
This is Saint Nikolai Veljarove. He was a Serbian bishop in, I think, the 19th century. So not that long ago, but he is a father of the church. He wrote extremely copious amounts of theology. And this was an excerpt called Prayers by the Lake. He did hundreds of these meditations, and it's in a compendium of Serbian Orthodox spirituality. So just I want to show you what he could do with that last verse of that psalm and how he kind of brought that together. And this, the icon we see here is Jesus, the high priest. And that's how we, and that's actually how in our main church, the bishop's throne, this icon is on the bishop's throne because the bishop sits in place of Jesus Christ, and he is the high priest. And when the bishop serves the liturgy, he is the high priest, and all the other priests serve under him. Okay, next.
Why is the book open in this icon and closed in most other icons of Jesus?
Yeah, good question. I think when the book is, yeah.
No, what I know of it is, or what I've learned from you, is that the book is closed because you don't know if your name is in that book or not.
Right.
So I'm wondering, why is it open in others, like this one?
Usually when it's open, there's an important verse that the viewer is supposed to look at, read the verse, and apply that to themselves. But you're right, when it's closed, it's the book of life. And you're hoping that your name is in that book.
Yeah.
Well, that icon right behind the screen, yeah, is open.
It's open?
Yeah.
Okay.
And right straight back there.
Okay. So yeah, depending on what it is. Now, when you go to the main church and you look at the dome, that's Christ Pantocrator. That's also Christ coming at the second coming. And so the book is closed because that's the book of life. And that will be opened at the last judgment. And then the names of those in the book of life will be there.
So that psalm, when you were first reading that, I thought it was very complex. And this kind of made it more understandable for me, way more understandable.
Yeah. Well, and that's why fathers of the church will take the scriptures and they will interpret them in a way that we can understand them. And like I said, Saint Nikolai was a 19th century father. So he wrote in a language that we could understand very well. in the 20th, 21st century people. Whereas people like St. John Chrysostom, writing in the 3rd and 4th century, wrote in Greek, number one, and number two, when it's translated into English, it's a way of speaking that we're not used to hearing in 21st century society. And so that's why St. Nikolai is a little more relatable when we hear his writing. So that verse, then I shall turn my hand against the young. The young ones, the very small ones of the flock, represent the entire community that is affected by God's intervention against his own Messiah. One may add that in the Septuagint, that is in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew word is referring to the shepherd lads. In this case, the wrath aims at the disciples. So the leader, Messiah, is struck and his followers are scattered. And that's what happens. There are few places where God is said to work against the Messiah. So this is a crucial element in the text. As St. Paul puts it, he talks about it in Galatians 3:13, referring to Deuteronomy, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, because it is written in Deuteronomy, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, that is the cross, in order that in Christ Jesus, the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So Jesus becomes a curse for everyone to take away the sin of the world, and that all of us, not just the physical descendants of Abraham, but all of us become children of Abraham and receive the promise of the Holy Spirit through faith, not through physical descent, but through the faith that Abraham had from the beginning. So Jesus, in fact, became a curse through his taking on of humanity and human sinfulness, and God must take action against the defiled. Now that sounds counterintuitive, but Jesus becomes a curse because he was the sinless one, takes on humanity, and by that taking on humanity, he takes on the sin of the world. And that sin is put to death and crucified through the cross. Does that make sense? So Christ, by the way, in the Garden of Gethsemane, asks God to take away the cup. Remember that? But then he said, but not my will be done, but your will be done. But the Father instead abandons Christ on the cross. I mean, it seems just cruel in a way, but that, by the same token, Christ must die. He must die to conquer death and rise from the dead. I think Dr. Jeannie talked about this yesterday. Why do we believe in Jesus Christ? What did he do for us? He conquered death. And through that conquering death, gave us eternal life. So that's what happens here. That's why it has to be. So going back to the first verse of the prophecy, sword, awake against my shepherd. There is a gradation of intent that begins with the command, sword, awake, and culminates with God's exact command to strike against his own Messiah, the shepherd. Now, in the New Testament application of this, in St. Mark's Gospel, we read the following. And Jesus said to them, his disciples, you will all become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. This reading is based on the Greek transcripts that depart from the Hebrew text and from the main channels of transmission of the Septuagint. What is he saying here? The main text in Hebrew is strike. It's an imperative command, strike. And the alternative reading is I shall strike, as we find in the New Testament application. This is an important interpretive deviation, because it's one thing to say strike in the general command, and it's something else to say I shall strike, which is an emphatic declaration of God's intervention in Messiah's dramatic end. So Jesus is basically saying, I will strike, my Father is going to give the command to strike me down. Okay. Now, I said I was going to talk about the arrest of Jesus because we normally think that Jesus is arrested by a small band of people. Well, I'm going to read to you the account of the arrest according to the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verse 12. And I'm going to insert two Greek words to clarify exactly how the arrest went down. Then the spira, which in English is translated as band of soldiers, and the chiliarchos, in English, the commanding officer, and the subordinates, officers of the Jews, arrested Jesus and bound him. Now, he seems pretty straightforward. Chiliarchos is a Roman officer commanding 1,000 men. A spira is commonly a Roman cohort consisting of 600 to 1,000 men. So, this means that the band of soldiers arresting Jesus was not just 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 men, but according to this account, they must have been at least 600 to 1,000 just to arrest one man.
So the disciples lopped off the guy's ear. I mean, when there's 600 or 1,000, how futile is that, you know?
I don't know. And the gospel doesn't explain it. We know that Peter struck the servant's ear, and we know that Jesus healed that servant's ear at the same time. The very last miracle that Jesus does is on his arrest. Okay, he strikes out the servant's ear, and Jesus said, "Put your sword away. Don't you know that I could call hundreds of thousands of angels and get out of this? But this must be done in order for the scripture to be fulfilled." And then the gospel, I think it's of John, says, then he reached down and he healed the servant's ear. And so Peter, we'll hear more about Peter here in a minute. He's very hot-headed. Peter thinks he's going to do it all, but he doesn't realize his own limitations.
Well, that soldier struck Jesus, didn't he? And then Peter was responding. Did he slap him? Did he try to remember?
I don't think at that point they slapped Jesus.
Did or was disrespectful or something?
They may have been disrespectful. He may have also been reacting to Judas's betrayal. So I'm not sure, but you might be right.
You're trying to get Judas instead of
He may have been lashing out, you know. I want to read a little bit more about the account of the arrest from according to the Gospel of John. And I'm going to look at the verse, I am he. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, Jesus knows all that's going to happen, came forward when the 600 to 1,000 people come to arrest him and asked them, whom are you looking for? Then they answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus replied, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they stepped back and fell to the ground. Now picture that, okay? Not just 30, 40 men, but hundreds of people, of soldiers. I am he. Boom. They fall to the ground just with those words. The chief priests and the Pharisees, by the way, not just brought hundreds of men, but lanterns and torches to prevent Jesus from escaping in the darkness. Okay, they were going to make sure they arrested him no matter what this time. But Jesus made no attempt to flee. On the contrary, he came forward to surrender himself to them. Last week, remember I said, Judas did not have to betray Jesus in order for the crucifixion to occur. And this just reinforces that. Jesus surrenders himself to them. This would have happened whether Judas kissed him with a betrayal or not. The Lord asked, "Whom do you seek?" Although he understood full well what they wanted, for he knew all things that should come upon him. From Jesus' question, it is evident that the soldiers did not recognize him, even though he was standing right in front of them. It was as if he were a complete stranger. Not even Judas recognized him at that moment. Okay. This is the account of the Gospel of John. We know that Judas came and kissed him with a false kiss, betrayal. But at this moment, Judas does not even recognize him because Jesus makes himself invisible to their recognition of him. Now remember, after the resurrection, he is not recognized by even some of his closest disciples until he allows them to see him or recognize him at one point. But this is the scenario here.
Do you think that applied to everybody that was there?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
even his disciples didn't recognize him?
Parents, well, no, take it back. I can't say for sure that the other disciples didn't recognize him. I believe they did. But this group that's coming to arrest him, including Judas, right now are completely blinded to him. The sole purpose of Christ's question was, in fact, to show that he could have walked right through the midst unnoticed by them. His power is ineffable, and they could never have crucified him unless he willingly surrendered himself. That's the point I want to make here. And not only did he blind their eyes, he hurled them to the ground merely by the simple statement, "I am he."
That was I am.
Thank you. And that's what we've talked about many times before. He literally uses the word, "I am Yahweh," which is the name that was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai. And the power of that word was enough to cast them to the ground.
Think of it like you said, he could have gotten away because they all fell to the ground. They assumed they were knocked out. But he probably waited around for them to come to.
And they got up,
You know,
and then he asks them again, "Whom do you see?"
Yeah.
And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." He says, "I told you, I am he." But now this time he comes, and I believe at this time now, Judas comes forward and he gives him the kiss. And that indicates to the arresting group that this is the one they want to arrest.
They didn't fall down twice, did they?
No, just once. That's the first
I
time.
like it.
Yeah, I bet.
So now going back, Jesus had predicted to them, now before the arrest, Jesus had said, "All of you will stumble because of me tonight." Then Jesus said to them, as we just heard, "You will all become deserters because of me this night." You're going to see hundreds of people coming toward us, and they're going to be coming to arrest me. You're going to flee. You're going to desert me. And then it is written, "I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Now, as God, Jesus foretells what will be, to avoid offending his disciples, to avoiding offending them by seeming to accuse them, he refers to the prophecy of Zechariah, thus implying, "It is I who have held you together, and my departure from you will scatter you." So he's kind of letting them off the hook, because I know you're going to flee, you're going to desert me. And by the way, it's been prophesied by this Zechariah. And so just understand that this is what's going to happen.
I mean, can you imagine it's 1,000 people, soldiers with weapons and so forth? You'd be scared to death too.
Yes, yes. And they know that this time they mean business. Jesus is not going to escape. He's not going to be able to get away or willingly get away. He is going to surrender himself to them. Now, what are they going to do to me if I'm
Yeah.
Philip or Nathaniel or the other disciples? What am I next? So the Father is set to smite the Son, in that the Jews crucified the Lord in accordance with the Father's plan of salvation, hence with his consent. So the Father consented, as we've said before many times. it said that the Father smote because he was able to prevent it, yet did not. Then Jesus takes away their grief by announcing to them the good tidings by saying, I shall rise and go before you, that is, precede you into Galilee. So he's trying to give them a little encouragement. Yes, it's going to be some dark times here, and I'm going to be crucified, horribly killed, but I will rise from the dead and I will go before you to Galilee. He shows that he will leave Jerusalem and go to the Gentiles, for the Gentiles do dwell in Galilee, as we know Galilee of the Gentiles. Peter's not done though. He says to Jesus, all right, if they all desert you, I will never desert you. If they're all chickens, not me. I'm sticking with you. And Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter, again, he doesn't give up. Okay, even though I must die, I will not deny you. So said all the other disciples. Matthew informs us that they all had this sense of courage. With great audacity, Peter alone promises not to stumble. Therefore, Christ permitted him to fall in order to convince him not to be confident in himself, but in God, and also to value Christ's words as more trustworthy than his own knowledge of himself. And so that's a lesson. When we hear this for Peter, we hear it for all of us, that we really rely on what Christ's words are rather than our own self-knowledge. Because Peter's words, though all become deserters, were full of arrogance, Christ shows him to be a braggart who did not know his own weakness. So then the Lord foretells to him both the hour that it will be this night and before the cock crows, and also the number of denials that he will deny him 3 times. Peter says, I'm never going to deny you. And he says, you're going to deny me not once, not twice, 3 times. And we see in this icon here, these are the 3 denials. First, the maid at the doorway. Hey, wait a minute. Weren't you one of his followers? I don't know this guy. He was thinking of somebody else. And then twice more. And then finally, after the cock crows twice, he weeps bitterly. Okay. And the difference between Peter's denial and betrayal of sorts and Judas's is that while Judas gave up and hanged himself, Peter wept bitterly and then went back to the Lord and asked for forgiveness and received forgiveness for what his own betrayal. Okay.
When did he ask to get that?
This was after the resurrection, when they
Okay.
met him in Galilee. And so the Lord foretells him, and likewise all the disciples made the same promise, boasting of fervor that proved old. So in the end, they fled, and really, who was the courageous one? Was John, the youngest, the teenager, who stuck by and right through, and we see on the icons, he's at the foot of the cross, lamenting, and then as we saw earlier with the burial as well.
And the women.
And
And the women.
And the women disciples who, and we hear this on the Holy Week, the courage of the myrrh-bearing women who went to the tomb afterwards, knowing full well that this was a tomb sealed by the Romans. Bang, seal on there. Nobody can open this. And yet they went to anoint the body of the Lord according to the custom of the Lord, of the law that they had produced. So that's where I'm going to end today. Any other comments or questions about what we've talked about? Okay, so next week, we're going to be talking about the trial, and Jesus is accused by fanatic witnesses. Now, the gospel says false witnesses, but the Hebrew word is fanatic witnesses, and we'll see why that is the case.
I just
Yes.
wanted to ask you, last week you said that even if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, Christ would have Christ would have to come. I don't get that. I was wondering if this is going to.
Sure. Yeah, the question is, I'm just telling it for the recording. The question is, if Adam and Eve had not sinned, I had said that Christ would have come to earth. The plan of the Trinity was for God to unite with humanity at some point. That was the whole plan of God creating man. And God's plan was to become one with his creation, with humanity. Now, God is omniscient, so he knows that man is going to fall. But if man had not fallen, the plan for the Trinity was still to become united with humanity. That's why man was made in the image and likeness of God, so that man and God could become united in this mystical way. And yes, it required man to be redeemed from sin. But if man had not sinned, the plan was still the same.
Okay, that makes sense because, I mean, to me, anyway, because sin separates us from God. So
Right.
that keeps us, so someone can fix that, right?
Exactly. And only God becoming man through Jesus Christ could remedy the fall of sin. All the prophets and all the holy men that came before, though they were holy and though they could do miraculous things, could not unite humanity with the deity. It had to be the deity himself who came down, who took flesh, and then killed sin on the cross, conquered death that came through sin, and then brought man back into union with God. In the Garden of Eden, man had a communion with God, but it wasn't complete. It wasn't complete. It was dependent upon the obedience, the free will and obedience of man to love God enough to keep his commandments. What Jesus did was come back and show us how to keep that commandment, fidelity to the Father, and then become united with him. Okay. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah. And I just want one last thing. In that vein, that's why the devil hated mankind, because the devil was envious of man that the deity, God, would dare to unite with a physical and spiritual being. And the devil was envious of that. And that's why the devil became the enemy. All right, well, thanks everybody for being here. See you next week. Thank you for being here today.
Thank
Well, good to see you.
You too. Hillary.
Charles, cool, nice to meet you.
I'm Rich.
Rich, nice to meet you. Charles. Hi, nice to meet you. Welcome. Glad you could be here today.
I do have a question.
Yeah,
That
Robert.
kind of goes back to last week too.
Sure.
So if Judas was the treasurer of the group, wouldn't it be more profitable for him to not betray Jesus? Is there anything to that?
You would think so, but he was so greedy that he wanted the
Instant
extra-
gratification type of thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So also Judas, this is the thought I had, I should have done that. I think, Judas was, okay, thinking, crooks always think they can outsmart. I think Judas was thinking he could outsmart the